The champagne flutes clinked together as David Mitchell raised his glass to toast another successful merger at the Maple Ridge Country Club. But what he didn't know was that his wife, Sarah, was about to serve him with papers that would dissolve more than just his overconfidence. As the Connecticut elite applauded his latest business triumph, Sarah stood quietly in the corner, her leather portfolio containing documents that would transform his precious prenuptial agreement from a shield into a sword pointed directly at his carefully constructed empire. The same legal brilliance that had made David untouchable in corporate boardrooms had also created the very weapon that would destroy him, and the irony was about to unfold in spectacular fashion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Mitchell family had always been synonymous with legal excellence in Westfield, Connecticut. For 3 generations, the name adorned the brass plaques of the most prestigious law firm in the region, Mitchell & Associates, where corporate giants came to ensure their mergers and acquisitions proceeded without a hitch. David Mitchell, at 35, represented the pinnacle of this legacy. Harvard Law School summa cum laude, senior partner before 30, and the architect of deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His corner office overlooking Hartford's skyline was decorated with photographs of handshakes that had reshaped entire industries, and his reputation for creating ironclad contracts was legendary among Connecticut's business elite. Sarah Mitchell had once been David's equal in the legal arena. Also a Harvard graduate, she had specialized in contract law and family legal matters, earning recognition as one of the rising stars in corporate legal consultation. Her analytical mind could dissect complex agreements with surgical precision, identifying loopholes and potential liabilities that others missed entirely. During their courtship, David had been impressed by her intellectual rigor and legal acumen, often seeking her input on particularly challenging cases. They were the golden couple of Connecticut's legal community, 2 brilliant minds destined to build something extraordinary together. Their wedding 7 years ago had been the social event of the season, held at the exclusive Riverside Manor with 500 guests, including judges, politicians, and Fortune 500 executives. Sarah had worn her grandmother's pearl necklace and carried white roses from the Mitchell family garden. David's best man toast had praised her as the perfect partner for both his personal and professional life, someone who understood the demands of legal excellence and would support his ambitions without reservation. The local newspaper's Society section had featured a full-page spread celebrating the union of 2 legal dynasties, predicting decades of continued success and influence. However, what the wedding guests hadn't witnessed was the extensive prenuptial negotiation that had consumed months of careful drafting and revision. David, influenced by his father Robert's business pragmatism and the family firm's experience with high-stakes divorces, had insisted on comprehensive financial protections. The prenup was a masterpiece of legal engineering, designed to preserve the Mitchell family assets and business interests, regardless of potential marital complications. David had personally overseen every clause, consulting with the firm's most experienced partners to ensure absolute security. The agreement established clear boundaries around the family business, the Connecticut estate, and David's inheritance from previous generations. Sarah would receive generous monthly support during the marriage and a substantial settlement in the event of divorce, but nothing that would threaten the core Mitchell holdings. David had been particularly proud of the document's sophistication. It anticipated virtually every scenario that could lead to marital dissolution and provided predetermined responses that heavily favored his interests. What made David supremely confident in his prenup's effectiveness was its treatment of adultery and marital misconduct. The agreement included standard morality clauses that appeared to treat infidelity equally, stating that either spouse who engaged in extramarital affairs would forfeit certain financial benefits. David viewed these provisions as reasonable deterrents that protected both parties, while acknowledging the realities of high-pressure professional lives. He had explained to Sarah that such clauses were common in agreements involving significant assets, designed to encourage mutual respect and fidelity. Sarah had initially resisted signing the prenup, not because she coveted David's wealth, but because the document seemed to anticipate the failure of their marriage before it had even begun. The extensive provisions for asset division and support limitations felt cold and calculating, inconsistent with the romantic partnership she had envisioned. However, David's family had made it clear that the prenup was non-negotiable, a standard business practice that protected generations of Mitchell achievement. Eventually, Sarah had agreed, trusting that their love would make the document irrelevant. After their marriage, Sarah had stepped back from her demanding corporate practice to support David's ascending career and manage their domestic life. The decision hadn't been entirely voluntary. David's schedule required a partner who could handle social obligations, family events, and household management while he focused on building the firm's national reputation. Sarah transitioned to running a small legal consulting business from their Greenwich home, handling contract reviews and family legal matters for local clients. The work was intellectually satisfying but represented a significant reduction in both income and professional prestige. David's career had flourished during their 7 years together. He had successfully expanded Mitchell & Associates into new markets, establishing satellite offices in Boston and New York, while maintaining the firm's Connecticut headquarters. His expertise in corporate law had made him a sought-after speaker at legal conferences, and a frequently quoted expert in business publications. The financial success had allowed them to purchase a stunning colonial home in Greenwich's most exclusive neighborhood, complete with manicured grounds and a pool house that hosted numerous family gatherings. Their social life revolved around Connecticut's legal and business elite. They attended charity galas at the Maple Ridge Country Club, hosted dinner parties for David's colleagues and clients, and maintained memberships in several exclusive organizations that facilitated both personal relationships and business development. Sarah had become skilled at navigating these social requirements, remembering names and family details that helped David build the personal connections crucial to his professional success. The Mitchell family dynamics had always been complex, with success creating both pride and pressure across generations. Robert Mitchell, David's father, had built the firm from a small practice into a regional powerhouse through decades of careful relationship building and strategic growth. He remained actively involved as chairman emeritus, providing guidance on major decisions while gradually transferring leadership to David. Margaret Mitchell, David's mother, managed the family's extensive social obligations and charitable commitments, ensuring the Mitchell name remained prominent in Connecticut society. David's siblings had chosen different paths that created interesting family tensions. Jessica Mitchell had pursued academic law, becoming a professor at Yale Law School, where she focused on constitutional issues and judicial reform. Her intellectual pursuits earned family respect but generated less financial success than David's corporate practice. Tommy Mitchell had initially joined the family firm, but eventually left to start a nonprofit legal aid organization, dedicating his career to helping low-income families navigate legal challenges. His decision to abandon lucrative corporate practice for social justice work had created ongoing debates about responsibility and family legacy. The extended Mitchell family included Uncle Frank, Robert's brother who had built a successful real estate development company, and Aunt Linda, who served on numerous nonprofit boards while managing significant inherited wealth. Their daughter Rachel worked as a prosecutor in the Hartford District Attorney's Office, while their son Michael had followed David into corporate law, but at a competing firm. These family connections created a network of influence and mutual support that had been instrumental in David's career advancement. Sarah's relationship with the Mitchell family had evolved from initial warmth to polite distance over the years. Margaret had welcomed her enthusiastically at first, appreciating her legal background and social grace. However, as Sarah stepped back from her career to support David's ambitions, Margaret seemed to view her more as a supportive wife than as an accomplished professional in her own right. Family gatherings often featured discussions of David's latest achievements, while Sarah's consulting work received polite but superficial attention. The family's social calendar was demanding and highly structured. Monthly dinners at the Mitchell estate brought together multiple generations to discuss business developments, family news, and community obligations. Holiday celebrations were elaborate affairs that required extensive planning and coordination. The annual summer gathering at the family's Martha's Vineyard property lasted 2 weeks and included extended family, business associates, and influential friends. These events strengthened family bonds while reinforcing the expectations and responsibilities that came with the Mitchell name. David's professional relationships had become increasingly complex as his success grew. His partnership in the firm required careful management of both legal expertise and business development responsibilities. He regularly traveled to New York and Boston for client meetings, often staying overnight when negotiations extended late or when multiple meetings justified longer trips. His calendar was managed by his executive assistant, Patricia, who coordinated his schedule with military precision to maximize efficiency and client satisfaction. The firm's culture emphasized both professional excellence and personal integrity, values that Robert Mitchell had instilled from the beginning. Partners were expected to maintain the highest ethical standards while delivering results that justified their premium fees. David had internalized these expectations completely, viewing his professional reputation as sacred and his personal conduct as inseparable from the firm's standing in the legal community. However, maintaining this level of professional intensity had created personal pressures that David struggled to acknowledge. The constant travel, long hours, and high-stakes negotiations were exhausting, even for someone with his drive and ambition. His marriage to Sarah provided stability and support, but he sometimes felt constrained by domestic obligations when major deals required complete focus. The competitive nature of corporate law meant that any sign of weakness or distraction could be exploited by rivals seeking to capture his clients or undermine his reputation. Sarah had noticed gradual changes in David's behavior over the past year that concerned her but which she initially attributed to increased work pressure. He had become more distant during their conversations, often checking his phone during dinner or responding to emails during family events. His travel schedule had intensified significantly, with trips to Boston becoming weekly occurrences rather than monthly obligations. When she asked about the increased demands, David explained that the firm was pursuing several major merger opportunities that required extensive client cultivation and relationship building. The changes weren't just professional. David's personal habits had shifted in ways that seemed inconsistent with their established routines. He had joined an expensive fitness club in Hartford, claiming that maintaining his physical condition was important for projecting success to clients. His wardrobe had been updated with more fashionable suits and accessories that went beyond what their social obligations required. Most notably, he had become more protective of his phone and computer, saying that client confidentiality concerns required additional security measures. Sarah's legal training had made her naturally observant about inconsistencies and patterns that might indicate problems. David's explanations for his behavioral changes were plausible individually, but collectively they suggested something more significant than simple work pressure. Her experience in contract law had taught her that people often revealed their true intentions through small details and casual comments rather than through direct statements. She began paying closer attention to David's stories about his business trips and client meetings, looking for the kind of contradictions that might indicate deception. The turning point came during a family dinner at the Mitchell estate, when David mentioned working late with a new business development consultant named Rebecca Chen, who was helping the firm explore expansion opportunities in California markets. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His description of her expertise and the importance of her strategic input seemed unusually detailed for what should have been routine consulting work. Margaret had asked several follow-up questions about Rebecca's background and qualifications, clearly interested in anyone who might influence the firm's future direction. David's responses revealed extensive knowledge of Rebecca's professional history, personal background, and even her preferences for restaurants and hotels during business travel. The level of detail went far beyond what would be expected from a normal consulting relationship, suggesting either unusual professional intimacy or personal interests that extended beyond business matters. Sarah noticed that David became slightly defensive when pressed for specifics about Rebecca's recommendations, deflecting questions with vague references to confidential strategic planning. After that dinner, Sarah began reviewing David's travel expenses and schedule with the analytical approach she applied to contract examination for her consulting clients. The pattern that emerged was troubling. David's trips to Boston had increased dramatically since Rebecca's involvement began, often extending to weekends when business meetings would typically not be scheduled. His expense reports showed charges for upscale restaurants and entertainment venues that seemed excessive for routine business development activities. Most concerning were the personal expenses that appeared on their joint credit card statements during David's travel periods. Charges for flowers, jewelry, and luxury items occurred consistently during his out-of-town trips, but were never mentioned in his accounts of business activities. When Sarah asked about these expenses, David provided explanations that were technically plausible but emotionally unsatisfying. Gifts for important clients, relationship-building investments, or rewards for achieving difficult negotiation targets. Sarah's suspicions crystallized during a weekend when David claimed to be attending a mandatory continuing education seminar in Boston, while she discovered that no such seminar was listed on the Massachusetts Bar Association calendar. Her legal research skills made it simple to verify educational requirements and scheduled events, revealing that David's explanation was completely fabricated. The realization that he was lying about fundamental aspects of his professional obligations forced her to confront the possibility that their marriage was built on deceptions she had been too trusting to recognize. The emotional impact of discovering David's dishonesty was profound and multifaceted. Sarah felt betrayed not just as a wife, but as a legal professional who prided herself on analytical precision and careful evaluation of evidence. The man she had married and supported through 7 years of career building had been systematically deceiving her while accepting her sacrifices and contributions to his success. The partnership she thought they had built was revealed as a one-sided arrangement where she provided support while he pursued interests that directly undermined their relationship. However, Sarah's legal training also provided her with analytical tools that personal emotion might have overwhelmed. Instead of confronting David immediately or demanding explanations that he could manipulate or deny, she decided to conduct a thorough investigation that would provide comprehensive evidence of his deception. Her experience in contract law had taught her that accusations without proof were easily dismissed, while systematic documentation created undeniable records that couldn't be explained away through charm or manipulation. The decision to investigate rather than confront required significant emotional discipline, but Sarah understood that knowledge was power in any legal dispute. If David was indeed violating their marriage through adultery, the evidence would determine not just the truth of his betrayal, but also the financial and legal consequences that would follow. The prenuptial agreement that David considered his ultimate protection might actually contain provisions that would work dramatically in her favor, depending on what her investigation revealed. Sarah's transformation from trusting wife to strategic investigator began with a careful review of the prenuptial agreement that had been stored in their home safe for 7 years. Reading the document with fresh eyes and professional expertise, she noticed details and implications that had escaped her attention during the original negotiations. The adultery clauses that David had presented as standard protections contained specific language about evidence requirements, financial penalties, and asset forfeiture that could fundamentally alter the agreement's impact, depending on how violations were proven and documented. Sarah's careful examination of their prenuptial agreement revealed complexities that she had overlooked during the emotional stress of wedding preparations 7 years earlier. The document was indeed a masterpiece of legal engineering, but her experienced eye now caught nuances and implications that would have escaped a younger, less experienced attorney. The adultery clauses were particularly sophisticated, containing specific provisions about evidence standards, burden of proof, and financial consequences that could dramatically reshape the agreement's impact depending on how violations were documented and presented. The language regarding marital misconduct was deceptively straightforward on the surface, but contained embedded triggers that could activate severe penalties for the violating spouse. David had crafted provisions that appeared to treat both parties equally, while actually creating asymmetrical consequences that heavily favored the financially weaker spouse in cases of proven adultery. The irony was staggering. David's legal perfectionism had led him to create protections so comprehensive that they would completely reverse the agreement's intended purpose if properly invoked. Most critically, Sarah discovered that the adultery amendment contained an escalation clause that increased financial penalties based on the duration and scope of the extramarital relationship. A brief indiscretion might result in modest adjustments to the settlement terms, but a sustained affair involving significant emotional and financial investment could trigger complete asset forfeiture. David had apparently been so confident in his own fidelity and so focused on protecting against Sarah's potential misconduct that he had created a legal nuclear weapon that could destroy his own financial position. the evidence requirements were equally revealing. The prenup specified that adultery claims must be supported by comprehensive documentation, including financial records, communication evidence, and witness testimony. This wasn't unusual for high-stakes agreements, but Sarah realized that David's own compulsive record-keeping and digital communication habits would likely provide exactly the kind of evidence the agreement required. His legal training had made him naturally systematic about documenting business activities, and that same precision would now work against him if he had indeed been conducting an affair. Armed with this new understanding of the prenuptial agreement's hidden potential, Sarah began her investigation with the methodical approach she had learned during her corporate law career. Her first priority was establishing a secure digital workspace where she could compile evidence without alerting David to her activities. She purchased a separate laptop using cash, established encrypted email accounts, and created secure cloud storage systems that would be invisible to anyone monitoring their shared home network or devices. Sarah's legal consulting business provided perfect cover for her investigation activities. Her clients regularly required research into corporate relationships, financial transactions, and professional backgrounds, so her suddenly intense focus on investigative techniques would appear completely normal to David or anyone else who might notice her working patterns. She could spend hours analyzing data, conducting online research, and organizing complex information without raising any suspicions about her true focus. The systematic approach that had made Sarah successful in contract law proved invaluable for personal investigation. She created comprehensive timelines correlating David's claimed business activities with his actual whereabouts, using credit card statements, phone records, and digital communications to establish patterns of behavior. Her experience identifying discrepancies in corporate agreements translated perfectly to detecting inconsistencies in David's explanations for his travel schedule and business relationships. David's relationship with Rebecca Chen became the central focus of Sarah's investigation. Using professional networking sites and social media platforms, Sarah was able to construct a detailed profile of Rebecca's background, career history, and current activities. What she discovered was both revealing and disturbing. Rebecca appeared to specialize in consulting relationships that extended far beyond typical business arrangements, with a pattern of involvement with married executives that suggested professional behavior bordering on predatory. Rebecca's LinkedIn profile portrayed her as a sophisticated business development specialist, with expertise in law firm expansion and client relationship management. Her recommendations came from partners at prestigious firms across the Northeast, all praising her strategic insights and relationship-building capabilities. However, Sarah's deeper research revealed that several of these professional relationships had ended abruptly, amid rumors of personal complications and ethical violations. Rebecca seemed to have perfected the art of developing intimate relationships with powerful men, while maintaining plausible professional cover. The geographic pattern of Rebecca's career was particularly telling. She had worked with law firms in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, each engagement lasting between 18 months and 3 years before ending, under circumstances that suggested personal rather than professional conflicts. Her movement between cities appeared to follow a deliberate strategy of avoiding long-term consequences while maximizing financial and professional benefits from each relationship. David was apparently her latest target, and his combination of wealth, influence, and emotional vulnerability made him an ideal candidate for her particular expertise. Social media analysis revealed aspects of Rebecca's personality and lifestyle that confirmed Sarah's suspicions about her intentions. Her Instagram account featured expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and designer accessories that far exceeded what a consulting practice should generate, particularly for someone without significant family wealth or previous business success. The timing of these posts correlated perfectly with David's business travel schedule, suggesting that his supposedly professional relationship with Rebecca was funding a lifestyle of luxury and indulgence. Most damaging were the subtle but consistent references to relationship complexity and emotional satisfaction that appeared in Rebecca's social media posts during the period of her involvement with David. Cryptic messages about finding unexpected connections and navigating challenging personal situations suggested that she viewed her relationship with David as more than professional consultation. Her posts from Boston locations during weekends, when David claimed to be attending business meetings, provided circumstantial evidence of their personal involvement. David's behavioral changes became more pronounced as Sarah's investigation deepened. His explanations for increased travel became more elaborate and defensive, suggesting awareness that his activities were generating scrutiny. He began making preemptive comments about demanding clients and complex negotiations that required extensive personal attention, as if anticipating questions about his schedule and whereabouts. His phone and computer security measures intensified dramatically, with new passwords and privacy settings that went far beyond reasonable client confidentiality requirements. The financial evidence was equally compelling. David's expense patterns had shifted significantly since Rebecca's involvement began, with charges for restaurants, hotels, and entertainment that exceeded anything their previous business development activities had required. The sophistication of the expenses suggested someone with expensive tastes who expected to be indulged, rather than someone providing straightforward business consulting. Jewelry purchases, spa treatments, and luxury retail charges appeared regularly during David's travel periods, but were never mentioned in his accounts of business activities. Sarah's investigation revealed that David had been using firm resources to support his relationship with Rebecca in ways that violated both professional ethics and the firm's internal policies. Company credit cards had been used for personal entertainment, firm vehicles had been employed for non-business travel, and office resources had been diverted to support activities that had nothing to do with legitimate client development. The scope of his misconduct extended far beyond simple adultery into professional fraud that could destroy his career even if their marriage survived. Perhaps most telling was David's treatment of Sarah during this period of investigation. His behavior toward her became increasingly dismissive and contemptuous, as if her presence was an inconvenience that interfered with more important priorities. Conversations that once involved mutual respect and intellectual engagement devolved into perfunctory exchanges about household logistics and social obligations. David seemed to view Sarah as a burden rather than a partner, someone whose needs and feelings were obstacles to his personal satisfaction and professional success. The emotional impact of these discoveries was devastating, but also clarifying for Sarah. The man she had married and supported through 7 years of career building had not only betrayed their relationship, but had done so with calculated cruelty that demonstrated complete disregard for her worth and contributions. The partnership she thought they had built was revealed as an exploitative arrangement where she provided support and stability, while he pursued interests that directly undermined everything they had supposedly created together. However, Sarah's legal training provided her with analytical tools that prevented emotional devastation from overwhelming strategic thinking. Each piece of evidence she gathered strengthened her position and clarified the path forward. David's arrogance and carelessness were creating a comprehensive record of misconduct that would be impossible to deny or explain away when the time came for confrontation. His confidence in the prenuptial agreement's protection was about to be shattered by the very legal expertise he had once admired in his wife. The investigation phase was approaching completion, and Sarah could see that she possessed enough evidence to prove David's adultery under the prenuptial agreement's stringent requirements. The next challenge would be determining the optimal timing and setting for revelation that would maximize the impact while minimizing David's ability to engage in damage control or manipulation. The careful, methodical approach that had characterized her investigation would need to transition into strategic action that would expose David's betrayal while protecting her own interests in the inevitable legal battle that would follow. The breakthrough moment in Sarah's investigation came through an inadvertent discovery that provided irrefutable proof of David's deception. While organizing tax documents for their accountant, Sarah found a receipt that David had apparently overlooked when sorting his business expenses. The charge was from an exclusive Boston jewelry store for a diamond bracelet costing $12,000. Purchased during a weekend when David had claimed to be attending a legal conference that Sarah now knew had never existed. The receipt contained detailed information that would prove invaluable for building her case. The purchase had been made using David's personal credit card rather than business accounts, suggesting awareness that the expense was inappropriate for professional reimbursement. The timing coincided precisely with social media posts from Rebecca's Instagram account showing her wearing jewelry that matched the description of the purchased bracelet. Most importantly, the store's customer service records, which Sarah obtained through a carefully crafted phone inquiry posing as David's assistant, confirmed that the jewelry had been gift-wrapped and delivered to a Boston hotel where David and Rebecca had both been registered as guests. This single piece of evidence connected multiple threads of Sarah's investigation into an undeniable pattern of deception. The financial record proved that David was spending significant money on gifts for another woman. The timing and location data established that he was lying about his business activities. The delivery information demonstrated that he was maintaining an intimate relationship that involved romantic gestures and shared accommodations. No reasonable interpretation could explain this evidence as anything other than proof of an ongoing affair. Armed with this concrete evidence, Sarah was able to trace additional financial transactions that revealed the full scope of David's deception. Credit card statements showed a pattern of luxury purchases that aligned perfectly with Rebecca's social media posts and travel schedule. Hotel charges consistently showed 2 guests rather than the single occupancy that would be expected for legitimate business travel. Restaurant expenses were invariably for 2 people at establishments known for romantic atmosphere rather than business dining. The most damaging discovery was David's use of firm resources to support his affair. Company credit cards had been used for weekend getaways that were categorized as client development activities. The firm's private car service had been employed to transport Rebecca to and from meetings with David. Office expense accounts had covered romantic dinners that were disguised as business entertainment. David was not only betraying his marriage, but was also stealing from his own family's law firm to fund his relationship with Rebecca. Sarah's legal expertise allowed her to recognize that David's financial misconduct created multiple legal vulnerabilities beyond the prenuptial agreement's adultery provisions. His misuse of firm resources constituted embezzlement that could result in criminal charges and professional sanctions. The systematic nature of his deception suggested intent to defraud rather than simple poor judgment. His position as senior partner made the violations even more serious, as he was supposed to model ethical behavior for the entire firm. Professional investigation tools that Sarah accessed through her consulting business provided additional evidence that would be admissible in legal proceedings. Reverse phone lookups revealed extensive communication between David and Rebecca during business hours, when they claimed to be conducting professional consultations. GPS tracking data from David's company phone showed regular visits to locations that had no business purpose but corresponded to Rebecca's residential and social activities. Email metadata analysis revealed personal communications that were intermingled with business correspondence in ways that violated client confidentiality protocols. The psychological profile that emerged from Sarah's investigation portrayed David as someone who had completely compartmentalized his life to justify his betrayal. He had convinced himself that his affair with Rebecca was a business relationship that happened to involve personal attraction, rather than acknowledging that he was systematically deceiving everyone who trusted him. His elaborate explanations and defensive responses suggested someone who had constructed an alternative reality, where his behavior was reasonable and justified, rather than criminal and cruel. Rebecca's role in the deception became clearer as Sarah's investigation progressed. Her background research revealed that Rebecca had a documented pattern of targeting married professionals with access to significant resources and minimal personal accountability. She specialized in relationships that provided financial benefits and professional advancement, while avoiding legal or social consequences through careful management of plausible deniability. David was simply her latest victim, though his legal expertise and financial resources made him a particularly valuable target. The evidence also revealed that David and Rebecca were planning a future together that involved his complete abandonment of his current life. Financial records showed that David had been gradually liquidating assets and transferring money to accounts that Rebecca could access. Property searches revealed that he had been investigating real estate purchases in California that would facilitate their relocation once his affair became public. Email communications discussed timeline for his departure from Connecticut and strategies for minimizing legal and financial consequences of divorce. Most shocking was the discovery that David and Rebecca had been specifically researching ways to invalidate or circumvent the prenuptial agreement. Legal research conducted on David's office computer showed extensive analysis of adultery clauses and strategies for claiming that the agreement was signed under duress or was unconscionable in its terms. They had apparently identified potential weaknesses in the document that could be exploited if Sarah attempted to enforce the adultery penalties, suggesting that David was already planning legal countermeasures for the confrontation he knew would eventually come. This revelation transformed Sarah's understanding of the situation completely. David wasn't just having an affair. He was conducting a comprehensive campaign to abandon his marriage while avoiding the financial consequences that the prenuptial agreement was designed to impose. His legal training was being used to systematically plan Sarah's emotional and financial destruction while protecting his own interests through manipulation of legal processes and procedural technicalities. The evidence of David's planning made Sarah realize that time was critical for protecting her own interests. If David and Rebecca successfully identified vulnerabilities in the prenuptial agreement or completed their asset transfer and relocation plans, Sarah's ability to enforce the adultery penalties could be severely compromised. She needed to act before David realized that his activities had been discovered, and while the evidence of his misconduct was still accessible and verifiable. However, Sarah also understood that premature action could be equally dangerous. David's legal expertise meant that he would immediately recognize any mistakes in her approach and would use procedural errors to undermine her case. The evidence had to be presented in a way that was legally bulletproof and strategically devastating, leaving David no opportunity for denial, manipulation, or countermeasures. The confrontation would need to be carefully orchestrated to maximize impact, while minimizing David's ability to control the narrative or limit the consequences. The prenuptial agreement's requirement for comprehensive evidence was actually working in Sarah's favor, as it had forced her to conduct an investigation that was far more thorough than what would be required for a typical divorce proceeding. She possessed financial records, communication evidence, witness information, and documentation that would satisfy the most stringent legal standards. David's own perfectionism in drafting the agreement had created requirements that his careless conduct had inadvertently satisfied completely. Sarah's transformation from betrayed wife to strategic legal adversary was now complete. She possessed evidence that would not only prove David's adultery under the prenuptial agreement, but would also expose his professional misconduct and criminal behavior. The question was no longer whether David had violated their marriage, but rather how to use that evidence most effectively to protect her interests and ensure that justice was served. The man who had created an ironclad prenuptial agreement was about to discover that iron could be melted when exposed to sufficient heat, and Sarah was prepared to turn up the temperature to maximum intensity. Sarah's legal consulting business had always been portrayed to David and his family as a modest practice that kept her intellectually engaged while supporting his demanding career schedule. What they didn't understand was that her client base had evolved far beyond simple contract reviews and family legal matters. Over the past 3 years, Sarah had developed a specialized expertise in forensic contract analysis and litigation support that made her services highly sought after by attorneys handling complex fraud cases and high-stakes business disputes. Her reputation in the legal community was built on an unusual combination of technical expertise and investigative instincts that allowed her to uncover evidence that other professionals missed entirely. Sarah had mastered advanced digital forensics techniques, financial analysis software, and investigation methodologies that were typically employed by specialized firms charging premium rates for corporate litigation support. Her home office contained equipment and databases that would be impressive even in a major law firm's discovery department. The skills that Sarah had quietly developed were perfectly suited for the challenge of proving David's adultery under the prenuptial agreement's stringent evidence requirements. Her experience with forensic accounting meant that she could trace financial transactions through complex networks of accounts and identify patterns that revealed the true nature of seemingly legitimate business expenses. Her digital investigation capabilities allowed her to recover deleted communications, analyze metadata, and establish timelines that could withstand aggressive cross-examination. Most importantly, Sarah understood the psychological and legal strategies that would be necessary to counter David's inevitable attempts to minimize or explain away his misconduct. Her litigation support work had taught her how sophisticated defendants attempted to create alternative narratives and procedural complications that could undermine even strong evidence. She was prepared for the techniques that David would likely employ and had already developed countermeasures that would neutralize his advantages in legal training and professional resources. The client base that Sarah had cultivated through her consulting practice included private investigators, forensic accountants, and specialized attorneys who handled cases involving professional misconduct and marital fraud. These relationships provided her with access to expert resources and technical capabilities that far exceeded what she could accomplish independently. When the time came to present her evidence, Sarah would be supported by a network of professionals who specialized in exactly the type of case that her marriage had become. Sarah's financial independence was another crucial asset that David had consistently underestimated. While her consulting practice appeared modest compared to his law firm partnership, she had been quietly building a substantial financial foundation that would allow her to pursue legal action without being constrained by economic pressure. Her client relationships and professional reputation meant that she could continue earning income even during an extended divorce proceeding, unlike many spouses who were financially dependent on their partners and therefore vulnerable to economic manipulation. The strategic advantage that Sarah possessed through her legal expertise was magnified by David's complete ignorance of her true capabilities. He continued to view her as a supportive wife whose intellectual abilities were devoted to his success rather than her own interests. His condescending attitude toward her consulting practice had prevented him from recognizing that she was actually developing skills and resources that could be turned against him with devastating effectiveness. David's arrogance had also made him careless about protecting information that could be used as evidence against him. He stored financial records and personal communications on shared computer systems, without considering that Sarah's technical knowledge would allow her to access and analyze data that he assumed was private. His legal training had taught him to be cautious about potential adversaries in business contexts, but had not prepared him to recognize threats from within his own household. The irony of the situation was profound and would only become more apparent as events unfolded. David had married Sarah partly because of her legal intelligence and professional competence, qualities that he assumed would make her a valuable partner in his career advancement. Instead, those same qualities had made her uniquely qualified to expose his misconduct and enforce legal consequences that would destroy everything he had worked to build. His attempt to use her loyalty and trust as cover for his betrayal was about to backfire spectacularly. Sarah's investigation had also revealed weaknesses in David's position that went beyond simple evidence of adultery. His misuse of firm resources created professional liability that could result in disciplinary action from the State Bar Association. His systematic deception about business expenses constituted tax fraud that could involve federal prosecution. His violation of client confidentiality protocols while using firm resources for personal purposes created potential malpractice exposure that could result in massive financial penalties. These additional legal vulnerabilities meant that David's exposure extended far beyond the prenuptial agreement's adultery penalties. Even if he somehow managed to minimize the marital consequences of his affair, the professional and criminal implications of his conduct could destroy his career and result in imprisonment. Sarah's comprehensive investigation had uncovered evidence that could be used to pursue multiple legal remedies simultaneously, creating a web of consequences that would be impossible for David to escape through legal maneuvering. The psychological impact of realizing her own power was transformative for Sarah. For 7 years, she had defined herself primarily in relation to David's career and the Mitchell family's expectations. The investigation process had forced her to rediscover her own professional competence and recognize that she possessed skills and resources that made her formidable rather than vulnerable. The woman who had been systematically deceived and emotionally manipulated was revealing herself to be a strategic adversary who could outmaneuver her betrayer, using his own legal system against him. Sarah's consulting relationships had also provided her with practical knowledge about divorce strategy and litigation tactics that would be crucial for protecting her interests during the coming confrontation. She understood how high-asset divorces were typically conducted, what procedural mistakes could undermine strong cases, and how to present evidence in ways that would be compelling to judges and juries. Her preparation was as comprehensive as anything she had ever undertaken for corporate clients, but this time the stakes were personal as well as professional. The timing of Sarah's revelation would be critical for maximizing the impact while minimizing David's ability to engage in damage control. Her experience with litigation had taught her that surprise was often more valuable than superior evidence, and that psychological pressure could force advantageous settlements that might be difficult to achieve through extended court proceedings. She was planning a confrontation that would be so sudden and comprehensive that David would be overwhelmed before he could organize an effective response. However, Sarah also understood that David's legal training made him a dangerous adversary, who would quickly recover from initial shock and begin mounting sophisticated countermeasures. Her advantage lay in preparation and superior evidence, but those advantages would diminish over time, as David adapted to the new reality and began using his professional resources to protect his interests. The window for decisive action was limited, and Sarah was preparing to exploit it with maximum efficiency. The transformation from victim to strategic adversary was complete, but Sarah recognized that the most challenging phase of the confrontation was just beginning. Gathering evidence and understanding legal options were intellectual exercises that played to her professional strengths. Actually implementing a strategy that would destroy her husband's life while protecting her own interests would require emotional fortitude and tactical precision that would test every aspect of her character and capability. As Sarah continued her investigation, she uncovered evidence that David's betrayal was far more systematic and calculated than she had initially realized. The affair with Rebecca was not a simple case of professional attraction that had evolved into personal involvement. It was part of a comprehensive plan that David had been developing for over 2 years to extract himself from his marriage while maximizing his financial position and minimizing legal consequences. Digital forensics analysis of David's computer revealed a hidden folder containing documents that detailed his long-term strategy for ending their marriage. The folder included financial projections showing how different divorce scenarios would affect his net worth, legal research into prenuptial agreement enforcement in Connecticut courts, and timeline plans for asset transfer and business restructuring that would protect his interests, regardless of how their relationship ended. David had been methodically planning Sarah's abandonment while maintaining the facade of a committed husband. The most shocking discovery was a series of encrypted communications between David and a divorce attorney in New York, who specialized in high-asset cases involving prenuptial agreements. The correspondence revealed that David had been secretly consulting with legal counsel for 18 months, developing strategies to minimize his financial exposure in the event of divorce, while creating circumstances that would make Sarah appear to be the unreasonable party seeking excessive compensation. The attorney had advised David on techniques for documenting Sarah's supposed shortcomings as a wife and professional partner. Rebecca's role in this conspiracy was more sophisticated than simple romantic involvement. Her background investigation revealed that she was actually a private consultant who specialized in helping wealthy men navigate complex divorce proceedings while maintaining their professional reputations and financial positions. Her supposed expertise in law firm business development was largely fictional. Her real skill was in creating plausible professional relationships that could provide cover for intimate involvement while gathering intelligence about assets, family dynamics, and potential legal vulnerabilities. The financial analysis became even more disturbing as Sarah traced the flow of money through various accounts and investments that David had been manipulating in preparation for divorce. He had been systematically undervaluing assets, transferring resources to offshore accounts, and restructuring business interests in ways that would minimize their apparent worth during property division proceedings. The prenuptial agreement's asset protection provisions were being supplemented by additional financial engineering designed to hide wealth that should have been subject to equitable distribution. David's law firm partnership was also being manipulated to support his divorce strategy. He had been negotiating changes to the partnership agreement that would reduce his apparent income and shift compensation to deferred arrangements that would not be immediately accessible during divorce proceedings. His colleagues were unknowingly participating in a scheme to help David appear less wealthy than he actually was, while the firm's resources were being used to support legal and financial planning that had nothing to do with legitimate business development. The scope of David's deception extended to their social relationships and family connections as well. Sarah discovered that he had been having confidential conversations with members of the Mitchell family about Sarah's supposed dissatisfaction with marriage and her alleged interest in pursuing a more independent lifestyle. These conversations were carefully designed to plant seeds of doubt about Sarah's commitment to the relationship, while positioning David as the long-suffering husband whose wife was ungrateful for his success and support. Most insidiously, David had been creating a false narrative about Sarah's mental health and emotional stability that could be used to challenge her credibility during divorce proceedings. He had been documenting supposed incidents of irrational behavior, emotional outbursts, and poor judgment that were either completely fabricated or grossly distorted versions of normal marital disagreements. This documentation was apparently intended to support claims that Sarah was emotionally unstable and therefore not entitled to rely on the prenuptial agreement's protection provisions. The conspiracy involved several other professionals who were providing David with services that were ostensibly legitimate but were actually designed to support his divorce preparation strategy. A financial advisor was helping him restructure investments in ways that would minimize apparent assets. A business consultant was providing cover for meetings and communications that were actually focused on personal rather than professional matters. Even their family accountant was unknowingly participating in tax planning that was designed to reduce David's apparent income and financial position. Sarah's investigation revealed that David's timeline for implementing his exit strategy was accelerating rapidly. Financial transfers were scheduled to be completed within the next 60 days. Business restructuring would be finalized before the end of the fiscal year, and legal documentation was being prepared to support immediate divorce filing if circumstances required rapid action. David was apparently planning to present Sarah with a fait accompli that would leave her with limited options and maximum pressure to accept unfavorable settlement terms. The evidence also showed that David was prepared to use professional and social pressure to isolate Sarah and limit her ability to mount effective resistance to his plans. He had been cultivating relationships with attorneys and financial professionals who might otherwise be available to represent Sarah's interests. His conversations with family members were designed to ensure that their sympathies would be with him, rather than with Sarah, when the marriage ended. Even their social circle was being manipulated to create an environment where Sarah would feel pressure to accept David's version of events and settlement terms. Rebecca's involvement in this broader conspiracy made her role even more sinister than simple adultery. She was essentially functioning as a professional accomplice who was helping David implement a comprehensive plan to betray and financially exploit his wife. Her expertise in managing complex personal relationships while maintaining professional cover made her an ideal partner for someone who needed to maintain appearances while systematically dismantling his marriage and preparing for a new life. The psychological sophistication of David's approach was particularly disturbing to Sarah, as she recognized how thoroughly she had been manipulated throughout their marriage. Every conversation about their future, every discussion of financial goals, every decision about career priorities had been influenced by David's hidden agenda to position himself advantageously for eventual divorce. The partnership she thought they were building was actually a carefully constructed exploitation scheme designed to maximize David's benefits while minimizing his obligations. However, Sarah also realized that David's elaborate planning contained vulnerabilities that could be exploited if she acted strategically and decisively. His confidence in the success of his scheme had made him careless about protecting evidence of his activities. His assumption that Sarah was naive and legally unsophisticated had prevented him from recognizing that she possessed the skills and resources necessary to uncover his deception. Most importantly, his focus on financial and legal maneuvering had blinded him to the prenuptial agreement's adultery provisions that could invalidate all of his careful planning. The discovery of David's comprehensive betrayal was emotionally devastating but also strategically clarifying for Sarah. She was not dealing with a husband who had made a mistake or succumbed to temptation. She was confronting a calculated adversary who had been systematically planning her exploitation for years. The situation required a response that was equally systematic and comprehensive, using David's own legal expertise and careful documentation against him in ways that he would never anticipate. Sarah's transformation from victim to strategic adversary was accelerated by the realization that her husband had never truly viewed her as a partner or equal. From David's perspective, she had always been a resource to be managed and eventually discarded when more attractive alternatives became available. The emotional impact of this understanding was profound, but it also provided clarity about what needed to be done and the level of commitment that would be required to protect her interests and ensure that justice was served. The evidence of David's broader conspiracy also revealed that Sarah's battle would extend beyond simple divorce proceedings to encompass professional misconduct, financial fraud, and potentially criminal activity. The scope of his deception created multiple avenues for legal action, but also increased the complexity and stakes involved in any confrontation. Sarah was preparing for a conflict that would determine not just the terms of their divorce, but also David's professional future and legal liability for his systematic betrayal of everyone who had trusted him. The investigation had already exposed David's systematic betrayal of their marriage and his elaborate financial manipulation, but Sarah's deeper analysis revealed that his deception had created a web of damage extending far beyond their personal relationship. The Mitchell family law firm itself had become unwittingly complicit in David's schemes, with partners and associates unknowingly providing cover for activities that violated both professional ethics and state bar regulations. The prestigious reputation that the firm had built over 3 generations was now at risk due to David's reckless pursuit of personal gratification. Sarah's forensic analysis of firm communications revealed that David had been using partnership meetings and strategy sessions to gather intelligence about client assets and business relationships that he then shared with Rebecca under the guise of business development consultation. This information was being used to identify potential romantic targets among the firm's wealthy clientele, creating a systematic exploitation scheme that went far beyond David's personal affair. Rebecca was essentially operating as a professional predator, with access to confidential client information that should have been protected by attorney-client privilege. The firm's senior partners, including David's father Robert, had unknowingly approved expenditures and business initiatives that were actually designed to support David's personal relationship and exit strategy. Company resources had been diverted to pay for Rebecca's consulting services that were largely fictional, while legitimate business development opportunities were being neglected in favor of activities that served David's romantic interests. The financial impact on the firm was substantial, but the ethical violations were potentially catastrophic for an organization that depended on client trust and professional integrity. Uncle Frank's real estate investments had been particularly affected by David's misconduct. The commercial property recommendations that had seemed so strategically sound were actually based on insider information that David had obtained through illegal means, creating potential liability for securities violations and fraudulent investment advice. Frank had committed substantial family resources to projects that were built on David's systematic abuse of his professional position, making him an unwitting victim of his nephew's criminal enterprise. The Mitchell family's charitable foundation, which had been a source of pride and community recognition for decades, had also been compromised by David's activities. Foundation funds had been used to support events and initiatives that provided cover for David's relationship with Rebecca, while legitimate charitable purposes were being subordinated to his personal agenda. The foundation's board members, including several prominent community leaders, were unknowingly participating in activities that violated nonprofit regulations and could result in loss of tax-exempt status. Margaret Mitchell's extensive social and charitable commitments had become part of David's deception network without her knowledge or consent. Her reputation and relationships were being exploited to provide legitimacy for David's supposed business activities, while her genuine efforts to support worthy causes were being undermined by the association with David's fraudulent schemes. The social capital that Margaret had spent decades building was now at risk of being destroyed by her son's calculated betrayal of family values. The investigation revealed that several of the firm's most important clients were being systematically deceived about the nature of their legal representation. David had been sharing confidential information about client financial situations and personal relationships with Rebecca, who was using this intelligence to identify additional targets for her consulting services. The clients who trusted the Mitchell family firm with their most sensitive legal matters were unknowingly having their privacy violated to support David's personal romantic pursuits. Jessica Mitchell's academic reputation at Yale Law School was also vulnerable to damage from David's professional misconduct. Her scholarly work on legal ethics and professional responsibility would be undermined by association with a family member who had systematically violated the principles she advocated in her research and teaching. The intellectual credibility that Jessica had earned through years of rigorous academic achievement could be compromised by David's criminal activities, regardless of her complete innocence regarding his schemes. Tommy Mitchell's nonprofit legal aid organization faced potential loss of funding and community support due to David's actions. Donors and supporters who associated the Mitchell name with integrity and social responsibility might withdraw their contributions if David's misconduct became public knowledge. Tommy's genuine commitment to helping low-income families navigate legal challenges could be sabotaged by his brother's pursuit of personal gratification at the expense of professional ethics. The extended family's financial interconnectedness meant that David's crimes had created potential legal liability for relatives who had no knowledge of his activities. Family members who had received gifts or loans from David could be forced to return money that was traced to fraudulent sources, while their own reputations and business relationships could be damaged by association with his criminal conduct. The close-knit family structure that had been a source of strength and support was now a vulnerability that David was exploiting without regard for the consequences to innocent relatives. Sarah's analysis revealed that David's law school classmates and professional network had also been manipulated to support his deception schemes. Alumni connections that should have been used for legitimate business development were being exploited to provide cover for his relationship with Rebecca, while professional relationships built on mutual respect and shared values were being corrupted by David's systematic dishonesty. The legal community's trust in the Mitchell family name was being undermined by David's willingness to sacrifice long-term professional relationships for short-term personal gratification. The firm's junior associates and support staff were unknowingly participating in activities that could damage their own professional reputations and career prospects. Administrative personnel who processed David's expense reports and travel arrangements were creating documentation that could implicate them in fraudulent schemes, while young attorneys who looked up to David as a mentor were being exposed to unethical behavior that violated everything they had been taught about professional responsibility. David's position of authority within the firm made his misconduct particularly damaging to colleagues who depended on his guidance and leadership. The State Bar Association's continuing education requirements and ethical oversight mechanisms had been systematically circumvented by David's fraudulent reporting of professional development activities. His false claims about attending conferences and training sessions created a pattern of deception that extended beyond financial fraud to include violations of mandatory professional obligations. The Bar Association's trust in David's integrity was being exploited to maintain his professional standing while he engaged in activities that should have resulted in disciplinary action and potential disbarment. Local businesses that had developed relationships with the Mitchell family firm based on mutual respect and shared community values were being damaged by David's misrepresentation of firm resources and priorities. Vendors who provided services to the firm in good faith were unknowingly participating in fraudulent schemes, while community organizations that had partnered with the firm for charitable and civic activities were having their reputations associated with David's criminal conduct. The investigation also revealed that David's misconduct was creating potential tax liability for family members and business associates who had unknowingly benefited from his fraudulent schemes. The Internal Revenue Service's aggressive pursuit of tax fraud cases meant that anyone who had received money or benefits that could be traced to David's illegal activities faced potential audits and penalties, regardless of their innocent intentions or lack of knowledge about the source of funds. Most disturbing was the discovery that David had been creating false documentation and misleading communications that could implicate innocent family members in his criminal activities. His systematic approach to covering his tracks included generating evidence that would suggest shared responsibility for decisions that were actually made unilaterally to support his personal agenda. Family members who trusted David's judgment and professional expertise were being positioned to appear complicit in schemes they knew nothing about. The scope of collateral damage created by David's betrayal was staggering in its breadth, and devastating in its implications for people who had devoted their lives to building reputations based on integrity and professional excellence. Sarah realized that her confrontation with David would need to address not only his betrayal of their marriage, but also his systematic destruction of family relationships and professional obligations that had taken generations to establish. The stakes extended far beyond personal satisfaction or financial compensation to encompass the protection of innocent people whose lives had been damaged by David's calculated pursuit of selfish gratification. The evidence of widespread damage also strengthened Sarah's resolve to ensure that David faced comprehensive consequences for his actions. His willingness to sacrifice other people's welfare and reputations to support his personal agenda demonstrated a level of selfishness and cruelty that demanded maximum accountability. The prenuptial agreement's adultery provisions were just the beginning of the legal reckoning that David deserved for his systematic betrayal of everyone who had trusted him. Sarah's investigation reached its most shocking phase when she uncovered the full scope of David's long-term strategy for not only ending their marriage but completely reinventing his life while avoiding accountability for his actions. Hidden within encrypted files on his personal laptop, she discovered a comprehensive blueprint that revealed the true magnitude of his betrayal and the sophisticated planning that had been underway for nearly 3 years. The master plan was titled Project Renaissance and included detailed timelines, financial projections, and contingency strategies that demonstrated David's systematic approach to abandoning his current life while maximizing his future opportunities. The document read like a corporate strategic plan, complete with risk assessments, implementation phases, and success metrics that treated his marriage and family relationships as assets to be liquidated, rather than human connections deserving respect and consideration. Phase 1 of David's plan had begun 18 months earlier, with the systematic documentation of Sarah's supposed shortcomings as a wife and professional partner. He had been creating a false narrative of marital dissatisfaction that portrayed Sarah as increasingly difficult, emotionally unstable, and professionally jealous of his success. This documentation was intended to provide justification for his eventual departure, while positioning him as the victim of an unreasonable spouse who had failed to appreciate his dedication and achievements. The psychological manipulation involved in this phase was particularly cruel, as David had been deliberately creating situations designed to provoke emotional responses from Sarah that he could then characterize as evidence of instability. Her normal reactions to his increasing distance and secretiveness were being reframed as symptoms of mental health issues that made her unsuitable as a partner for someone of his professional stature. The gaslighting was systematic and calculated, designed to undermine Sarah's confidence while building a legal case for favorable divorce terms. Phase 2 involved the gradual restructuring of family and professional relationships to minimize the social and financial consequences of divorce. David had been cultivating alliances within the extended family that would support his version of events when the marriage ended. His conversations with Margaret and Robert Mitchell had been carefully designed to plant doubts about Sarah's commitment to family values, while reinforcing his image as a devoted son who deserved support during difficult personal circumstances. The professional component of Phase 2 was equally systematic, involving the reorganization of firm responsibilities and financial arrangements to protect David's interests during divorce proceedings. He had been negotiating changes to partnership agreements that would reduce his apparent income while increasing his control over firm assets. Clients were being gradually transitioned to arrangements that would follow David rather than remaining with the firm, ensuring that his professional value would be portable in the event of family conflicts. Phase 3, which was scheduled to begin within the next 60 days, involved the acceleration of asset transfers and the implementation of David's exit strategy. Significant funds were prepared for movement to offshore accounts that would be difficult for Sarah to access during divorce proceedings. Real estate investments were being restructured to minimize their apparent value while maximizing David's control over actual resources. The family home and other shared assets were being positioned for sale or transfer, under circumstances that would heavily favor David's financial position. The most shocking aspect of Phase 3 was David's plan to relocate to California with Rebecca, while simultaneously filing for divorce in Connecticut under terms that would portray Sarah as the abandoning spouse. His legal research had identified procedural advantages that could be gained by initiating divorce proceedings while maintaining the appearance of trying to preserve the marriage. The strategy was designed to maximize sympathy for David while minimizing Sarah's ability to present her case effectively. Rebecca's role in the master plan extended far beyond romantic involvement to encompass professional collaboration in David's reinvention strategy. Her consulting business was actually a front for services that specialized in helping wealthy professionals navigate complex personal transitions while protecting their assets and reputations. She had successfully managed similar situations for other clients, developing expertise in legal strategies and public relations approaches that minimized the personal and professional costs of abandoning family obligations. The financial analysis contained within David's plan revealed the true scope of his deception regarding their marital assets. He had been systematically undervaluing properties, hiding income streams, and creating artificial liabilities that would reduce the apparent worth of their shared holdings. The prenuptial agreement's asset protection provisions were being supplemented by additional financial engineering that would leave Sarah with a fraction of what she should have been entitled to receive under equitable distribution principles. David's plan also included strategies for managing media attention and professional reputation during the divorce proceedings. He had been preparing statements and explanations that would portray the marriage's end as a mutual decision based on incompatible life goals, rather than acknowledging his adultery and professional misconduct. The narrative was designed to protect his standing in the legal community, while characterizing Sarah as someone who had failed to adapt to the demands of his successful career. The contingency planning within David's strategy was remarkably comprehensive, addressing potential complications ranging from Sarah's discovery of his affair to family members' negative reactions to his behavior. Each scenario included specific responses designed to minimize damage while maintaining his strategic advantages. The level of detail demonstrated that David had been anticipating potential obstacles and preparing countermeasures with the same thoroughness he applied to complex legal cases. Most disturbing was David's analysis of Sarah's likely responses to his departure, which revealed his complete lack of empathy for the emotional and financial devastation his actions would cause. He had calculated her probable legal strategies and emotional reactions with clinical detachment, viewing her pain and confusion as tactical considerations rather than consequences of his betrayal of someone who had loved and supported him for 7 years. The plan included specific strategies for isolating Sarah from potential sources of support and legal assistance. David had been systematically cultivating relationships with attorneys and financial professionals who might otherwise be available to represent Sarah's interests during divorce proceedings. His goal was to create a situation where Sarah would have limited access to high-quality legal representation, while he retained the advantages of superior resources and professional connections. David's exit strategy also addressed the management of family relationships after his departure, with detailed plans for maintaining connections that served his interests, while abandoning obligations that he found burdensome. He intended to preserve his relationship with family members who could provide business opportunities or social advantages, while distancing himself from relatives whose expectations or judgment might interfere with his new lifestyle. The discovery of Project Renaissance transformed Sarah's understanding of her situation completely. She was not dealing with a husband who had made impulsive decisions or succumbed to temporary temptation. She was confronting someone who had been systematically planning her destruction for years while maintaining the appearance of a loving partner. The emotional impact was devastating, but the strategic implications were clarifying in ways that would prove crucial for her response. The comprehensive nature of David's planning also revealed vulnerabilities that Sarah could exploit if she acted decisively and strategically. His confidence in the success of his scheme had made him careless about protecting evidence of his activities, while his assumption that Sarah was naive and legally unsophisticated had prevented him from recognizing the threats posed by her actual capabilities. Most importantly, his focus on financial and procedural maneuvering had blinded him to the prenuptial agreement's adultery provisions that could invalidate his entire strategy. The timeline pressure created by David's accelerated implementation schedule meant that Sarah's window for effective action was rapidly closing. If she failed to act before Phase 3 began, her ability to protect her interests and hold David accountable would be severely compromised. The master plan's existence provided both the motivation and the urgency necessary for Sarah to move from investigation to confrontation with maximum strategic impact. The discovery of David's comprehensive betrayal plan catalyzed Sarah's transformation from passive victim to strategic adversary with surgical precision. Her legal training and professional experience provided the foundation for developing a response that would be as systematic and devastating as David's own scheme, but with the crucial advantage of moral authority and legal legitimacy that his criminal conduct had forfeited. The preparation phase would require careful coordination of evidence, legal strategy, and tactical timing that would maximize impact while minimizing David's ability to mount effective countermeasures. Sarah's first priority was securing and organizing the massive amount of evidence she had gathered in a format that would be immediately accessible and legally admissible during any confrontation or subsequent legal proceedings. Her forensic documentation included financial records, communication intercepts, photographic evidence, and expert analysis that collectively painted an irrefutable picture of David's systematic deception and criminal conduct. The challenge was presenting this information in a way that would be overwhelming to David, while remaining comprehensible to family members and potential legal authorities. The evidence organization required sophisticated database management and presentation technology that Sarah accessed through her professional consulting relationships. Each piece of documentation was cataloged with metadata indicating its source, verification status, and legal significance. Timeline software allowed her to create visual presentations that correlated David's claimed activities with his actual whereabouts and financial transactions. The result was a comprehensive case file that would satisfy the most stringent courtroom standards while being accessible to non-lawyers who needed to understand the scope of David's betrayal. Legal strategy development involved consultation with specialized attorneys who had experience handling high-asset divorces involving prenuptial agreements and professional misconduct. Sarah's professional network included several practitioners who specialized in complex marital litigation and who could provide guidance on procedural requirements and tactical approaches. Her consulting work had established relationships with experts in forensic accounting, digital investigation, and fraud analysis who could provide professional testimony if David attempted to challenge her evidence. The prenuptial agreement's adultery provisions required specific documentation standards that would need to be satisfied before financial penalties could be enforced. Sarah's evidence exceeded these requirements substantially, but she wanted to ensure that every technical detail was addressed properly to prevent David from exploiting procedural defenses. Her analysis revealed that the agreement's language was actually more favorable to her position than David had apparently realized when he drafted the document years earlier. Financial preparation involved protecting Sarah's own assets while positioning herself to survive an extended legal conflict if David chose to fight rather than accept the consequences of his actions. Her consulting business provided independent income that would allow her to maintain her lifestyle without depending on David's support. She had also been quietly establishing separate financial accounts and credit arrangements that would be beyond David's ability to freeze or manipulate during divorce proceedings. The strategic timing of Sarah's confrontation required careful analysis of multiple factors that would influence the effectiveness of her revelation. David's professional schedule, family obligations, and Rebecca's availability all needed to be considered to ensure maximum impact with minimum opportunity for damage control. Sarah had identified several upcoming events that would provide ideal settings for exposing David's betrayal to the people whose opinions mattered most for his professional and social standing. The psychological preparation for confronting David required Sarah to steel herself for the emotional intensity of destroying her husband's life while protecting her own interests. Her legal training helped her maintain analytical detachment, but the personal nature of the betrayal made emotional control challenging. She had been working with a therapist who specialized in supporting professionals during high-stress litigation to develop coping mechanisms that would allow her to function effectively during the confrontation phase. Communication strategy development involved preparing responses to every argument or explanation that David might offer when confronted with evidence of his misconduct. Her experience with complex negotiations and her knowledge of David's personality allowed her to anticipate his likely reactions and prepare countermeasures that would neutralize his advantages in charm and legal expertise. She had rehearsed presentations and responses until they became second nature, ensuring that emotional stress would not interfere with tactical execution. The coordination of professional support required assembling a team of specialists who could provide immediate assistance when David's confrontation triggered legal and financial complications. Private investigators were prepared to document any attempts by David to destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses. Forensic accountants were ready to trace asset transfers and identify hidden resources. Security consultants had been engaged to protect Sarah's physical safety if David's reaction to exposure became threatening or unpredictable. Technology security measures were implemented to protect Sarah's investigation files and evidence databases from potential retaliation efforts. Her computer systems were secured with encryption and backup protocols that would prevent David from accessing or destroying crucial documentation. Communications with her legal team were conducted through secure channels that would protect attorney-client privilege while preventing David from monitoring her strategic planning. The family dynamics preparation involved analyzing how different Mitchell family members would likely react to evidence of David's betrayal and planning approaches that would maximize support for Sarah while minimizing family divisions. Her understanding of each person's personality and values allowed her to tailor presentations that would be most effective for generating appropriate responses. The goal was to ensure that family loyalty would be directed toward justice, rather than toward protecting David from consequences he had earned through his own choices. Public relations considerations were addressed through consultation with specialists who understood how professional misconduct cases affected legal careers and family reputations. Sarah wanted to protect innocent family members from unnecessary damage, while ensuring that David faced appropriate professional consequences for his systematic violation of ethical obligations. The strategy involved controlled disclosure that would satisfy legal requirements while minimizing collateral harm to people who had been David's victims rather than his accomplices. The contingency planning phase addressed potential complications ranging from David's immediate departure to his attempts to claim mental health or substance abuse issues as mitigating factors. Each scenario was analyzed with specific response protocols that would protect Sarah's interests while maintaining her strategic advantages. The preparation was as comprehensive as anything she had ever undertaken for corporate clients, but the personal stakes made the attention to detail even more critical. Media management strategy recognized that David's professional prominence and the Mitchell family's social standing would likely generate public interest in their divorce proceedings. Sarah wanted to ensure that any media attention would focus on David's professional misconduct rather than on personal details that might embarrass innocent family members. The approach involved proactive communication with legal reporters and careful coordination with law enforcement if criminal charges became necessary. The final element of Sarah's preparation involved establishing clear objectives for the confrontation that went beyond simple revenge or emotional satisfaction. Her goals included recovering financial assets that David had hidden or transferred illegally, ensuring that he faced appropriate professional consequences for his misconduct, protecting innocent family members from further damage, and establishing a foundation for her own future success independent of the Mitchell family's resources or reputation. The comprehensive preparation phase had taken weeks of intensive effort, but Sarah recognized that her success would depend on flawless execution during the confrontation itself. David's legal expertise and professional resources would make him a formidable adversary once he realized that his schemes had been discovered. Her advantage lay in superior preparation and the element of surprise, but those advantages would disappear quickly if she failed to capitalize on them decisively when the moment for action arrived. The convergence of circumstances that would provide Sarah with the optimal moment for exposing David's betrayal came together with an irony so perfect that it seemed orchestrated by fate itself. The annual Mitchell Family Foundation Gala, scheduled for the last Saturday of October, would bring together every person whose opinion mattered for David's professional and social standing, in a formal setting where his humiliation would be both public and irreversible. The event that David had been planning to use as a final celebration of his success before implementing his exit strategy would instead become the stage for his complete destruction. The Foundation Gala was the most prestigious social event on the Mitchell family's annual calendar, attracting judges, politicians, business leaders, and legal luminaries from across Connecticut and neighboring states. David's role as the event's keynote speaker discussing, quote, professional ethics in modern legal practice, would provide exquisite irony as the moment when his own systematic violation of every principle he was supposed to represent would be revealed to an audience of his peers and superiors. Sarah's position as the foundation's event coordinator gave her complete control over the evening's logistics, timing, and technical arrangements. Her months of planning had ostensibly been focused on creating a memorable celebration of the foundation's charitable achievements, but her actual preparation had been designed to facilitate David's exposure with maximum impact and minimum opportunity for damage control. Every detail of the evening had been orchestrated to serve her strategic objectives while maintaining the appearance of routine foundation business. He regularly traveled to New York and Boston for client meetings, often staying overnight when negotiations extended late or when multiple meetings justified longer trips. His calendar was managed by his executive assistant, Patricia, who coordinated his schedule with military precision to maximize efficiency and client satisfaction. The firm's culture emphasized both professional excellence and personal integrity, values that Robert Mitchell had instilled from the beginning. Partners were expected to maintain the highest ethical standards while delivering results that justified their premium fees. David had internalized these expectations completely, viewing his professional reputation as sacred and his personal conduct as inseparable from the firm's standing in the legal community. However, maintaining this level of professional intensity had created personal pressures that David struggled to acknowledge. The constant travel, long hours, and high-stakes negotiations were exhausting, even for someone with his drive and ambition. His marriage to Sarah provided stability and support, but he sometimes felt constrained by domestic obligations when major deals required complete focus. The competitive nature of corporate law meant that any sign of weakness or distraction could be exploited by rivals seeking to capture his clients or undermine his reputation. Sarah had noticed gradual changes in David's behavior over the past year that concerned her but which she initially attributed to increased work pressure. He had become more distant during their conversations, often checking his phone during dinner or responding to emails during family events. His travel schedule had intensified significantly, with trips to Boston becoming weekly occurrences rather than monthly obligations. When she asked about the increased demands, David explained that the firm was pursuing several major merger opportunities that required extensive client cultivation and relationship building. The changes weren't just professional. David's personal habits had shifted in ways that seemed inconsistent with their established routines. He had joined an expensive fitness club in Hartford, claiming that maintaining his physical condition was important for projecting success to clients. His wardrobe had been updated with more fashionable suits and accessories that went beyond what their social obligations required. Most notably, he had become more protective of his phone and computer, saying that client confidentiality concerns required additional security measures. Sarah's legal training had made her naturally observant about inconsistencies and patterns that might indicate problems. David's explanations for his behavioral changes were plausible individually, but collectively they suggested something more significant than simple work pressure. Her experience in contract law had taught her that people often revealed their true intentions through small details and casual comments rather than through direct statements. She began paying closer attention to David's stories about his business trips and client meetings, looking for the kind of contradictions that might indicate deception. The turning point came during a family dinner at the Mitchell estate, when David mentioned working late with a new business development consultant named Rebecca Chen, who was helping the firm explore expansion opportunities in California markets. The foundation's financial arrangements had been structured to provide additional leverage over David's behavior during and after his exposure. His partnership in the law firm that provided substantial funding to the foundation created fiduciary obligations that could be used to demand his immediate resignation if his conduct compromised the organization's reputation or legal standing. The charitable commitments that David had made on behalf of the firm would become personal obligations that could be enforced through civil litigation if necessary. Sarah's coordination with law enforcement officials ensured that David's potential criminal liability would be addressed promptly if the evidence warranted prosecution. Federal investigators who specialized in financial crimes had been briefed about David's misconduct and were prepared to initiate formal proceedings if his violation of tax laws and securities regulations required criminal sanctions. The public nature of his exposure would prevent any possibility of informal resolution that might allow him to escape accountability. The psychological dynamics of the confrontation had been carefully orchestrated to maximize David's emotional distress, while maintaining Sarah's strategic control throughout the revelation process. His public speaking engagement would require him to maintain composure and professional demeanor even as his world collapsed around him, creating a level of psychological pressure that would prevent effective damage control or strategic thinking. The formal setting would trap him in a situation where any response would appear inappropriate, while failing to respond would confirm his guilt. Family members who had been unknowingly supporting David's deception would be forced to confront the reality of his betrayal in a setting where their own reputations and professional standing were at stake. The public nature of the revelation would prevent private family discussions that might allow David to manipulate interpretations or deflect blame onto others. Every person whose respect David valued would witness his humiliation simultaneously, making recovery or rehabilitation impossible. The networking opportunities that typically characterized foundation galas would be transformed into damage assessment sessions, where David's professional associates would begin calculating their own exposure and planning strategies for protecting their interests. The social environment that should have enhanced David's reputation would instead facilitate rapid communication about his misconduct and coordinate collective responses from the legal community. Sarah's preparation had anticipated every possible reaction from David and developed countermeasures that would neutralize his advantages in legal training and professional connections. His attempts to claim victim status would be met with comprehensive evidence of his systematic planning and criminal conduct. His efforts to minimize the significance of his actions would be countered by documentation showing the extensive harm to family members, clients, and professional colleagues. His legal expertise would become a liability rather than an asset, as it demonstrated his deliberate violation of obligations he understood completely. The perfect storm of circumstances that Sarah had created would ensure that David's exposure was not just personally devastating, but professionally catastrophic in ways that would prevent any possibility of recovery or redemption. The man who had spent years planning Sarah's destruction was about to experience his own annihilation through the systematic application of justice that his arrogance and cruelty had made inevitable. The Mitchell Family Foundation Gala proceeded with elegant precision until the moment Sarah Mitchell stepped to the podium immediately following her husband's keynote address on professional ethics. David had just finished delivering 30 minutes of passionate rhetoric about integrity, duty, and the sacred trust between attorneys and their clients, when Sarah approached the microphone with a serene smile and a leather portfolio that would transform the evening from celebration into courtroom. "Thank you, David, for that inspiring speech about professional ethics," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system to an audience of 300 Connecticut legal luminaries. "Your words about the importance of honesty and accountability in our profession were particularly moving. I think everyone here would agree that attorneys who violate the trust placed in them should face the full consequences of their actions." The audience murmured agreement, assuming Sarah was simply offering spousal support for David's presentation. David himself looked puzzled but pleased, clearly expecting routine remarks, thanking guests, and summarizing the foundation's achievements. What he didn't notice was the subtle positioning of cameras and recording equipment that Sarah had arranged throughout the ballroom, or the strategic placement of state bar officials and federal investigators among the evening's distinguished guests. Which brings me to tonight's actual purpose. Sarah continued, opening her portfolio to reveal the first exhibit in what would become a comprehensive presentation of evidence. As many of you know, I've spent years supporting David's career while managing my own legal consulting practice. What you don't know is that my expertise in forensic contract analysis and financial investigation has been very useful recently for uncovering some disturbing information about activities much closer to home. The large screens positioned throughout the ballroom suddenly displayed a detailed timeline showing David's claimed business activities over the past 18 months contrasted with GPS data, financial transactions, and photographic evidence documenting his actual whereabouts. The professional quality of the presentation made it immediately clear that this was not an emotional outburst but a systematic legal case built with courtroom precision. The blue entries show where my husband claimed to be conducting firm business, Sarah explained with the calm authority of an experienced litigator. The red entries show where he actually was, based on credit card transactions, phone GPS data, and social media evidence. As you can see, they rarely match. A shocked silence fell over the ballroom as Connecticut's legal elite absorbed the implications of what they were witnessing. David stood frozen at his table, his face cycling through disbelief, panic, and dawning horror, as he realized that his carefully constructed world was collapsing in the most public and devastating way possible. For example, Sarah continued, advancing to specific evidence. During the weekend, David claimed to be attending a mandatory continuing education seminar in Boston. He was actually at a luxury resort in the Berkshires with his business development consultant, Rebecca Chen, who is seated at table 12 this evening. Every head in the ballroom turned toward Rebecca, who had gone pale, as she realized her own exposure was part of Sarah's comprehensive revelation. The cameras captured her shocked expression as murmurs of recognition rippled through the audience. Several judges and senior attorneys were already reaching for their phones, understanding that they were witnessing events that would require immediate professional and legal responses. Sarah's presentation continued with surgical precision, displaying financial records that documented David's systematic embezzlement from the firm, his fraudulent expense reports totaling over $200,000, and his misuse of client confidential information to support his personal relationship. Each piece of evidence was date-stamped, verified, and presented with the thoroughness that characterized the most complex commercial litigation. The financial fraud extends beyond simple expense manipulation, Sarah explained, displaying a network diagram showing David's relationship with vendors who had provided inflated receipts in exchange for guaranteed business. My husband developed a sophisticated conspiracy involving multiple businesses that systematically defrauded Mitchell and Associates while funding his extramarital relationship. Robert Mitchell, David's father and the firm's founding partner, had turned ashen as he realized the scope of his son's betrayal and the potential liability it created for the family business. Margaret Mitchell was crying silently, her hands covering her face as she absorbed the destruction of everything she had believed about her golden child. The extended family members present were staring at David with expressions of shock and betrayal that made clear his complete exile from relationships he had exploited for years. The most devastating portion of Sarah's presentation involved David's comprehensive plan to abandon his family while avoiding financial consequences through manipulation of legal procedures and asset transfers. Project Renaissance was displayed in its entirety, showing David's systematic preparation for deserting everyone who had trusted him while protecting his own interests through elaborate deception schemes. This document, which I discovered on my husband's personal computer, reveals that his affair was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but part of a 3-year plan to exit our marriage while maximizing his financial position and minimizing legal accountability. Sarah announced as the audience read David's own words describing his family as obstacles to be overcome rather than relationships to be honored. David finally found his voice, standing shakily and attempting to address the audience with some semblance of his former confidence. This is clearly a vindictive attack from someone who has become emotionally unstable due to our marital difficulties, he began, but his words were immediately undermined by Sarah's next revelation. That brings us to the most important aspect of tonight's presentation, Sarah said, displaying the prenuptial agreement that David had crafted with such confidence 7 years earlier. The adultery amendment that my husband included in our prenuptial agreement specifies that systematic extramarital relationships involving financial fraud trigger complete forfeiture of protected assets and business interests. The legal implications hit the audience like a physical blow as they realized that David's own legal perfectionism had created the weapon that would destroy him. Attorneys who specialized in family law were already calculating the devastating consequences while David stood speechless, finally understanding that his arrogance had engineered his own destruction. The evidence I've presented tonight meets every requirement specified in the prenuptial agreement for proving adultery and financial misconduct, Sarah continued. Under the terms that David himself negotiated, his violations result in forfeiture of his partnership in Mitchell and Associates, his share of family assets, and his claim to any marital property acquired during our relationship. State Bar Association officials were quietly conferring about immediate suspension proceedings, while federal investigators were reviewing evidence of tax fraud and securities violations that would require criminal prosecution. The social gathering had transformed into an impromptu legal proceeding, where David's professional future was being decided by the very colleagues whose respect he had valued above his family's trust. The coup de grace came when Sarah displayed recordings of David's conversations with Rebecca discussing their plans to relocate to California, while leaving Sarah financially devastated through manipulation of legal procedures. His own voice provided irrefutable evidence of premeditated betrayal that eliminated any possibility of claiming victim status or seeking sympathy from the audience of his peers. The prenuptial agreement that David believed would protect him from consequences actually requires him to compensate me for his violations in amounts that will transfer the majority of his wealth and professional assets to my control, Sarah announced. His attempt to use legal expertise for personal protection has instead created comprehensive accountability that extends far beyond our marriage to encompass his professional misconduct and criminal activities. The immediate aftermath of Sarah's presentation created chaos that David was completely unprepared to manage. Clients of Mitchell & Associates were demanding immediate meetings to assess their own exposure to David's misconduct. Partners in the firm were calculating the financial and reputational damage, while planning emergency measures to protect the organization from liability. Federal investigators were requesting documentation that would support criminal charges for fraud and tax evasion. David's attempt to leave the ballroom was blocked by reporters who had been alerted to attend the event, ensuring that his humiliation would be documented and distributed throughout Connecticut's legal community and beyond. His professional reputation was destroyed completely and irreversibly, while his personal relationships lay in ruins around him. The golden boy of the Mitchell family had become a pariah, whose name would be synonymous with betrayal and professional misconduct. The legal proceedings that followed Sarah's revelation unfolded with remarkable speed as David's position became increasingly untenable. His law firm partnership was terminated within 48 hours to protect the organization from further liability. State Bar Association disciplinary proceedings resulted in his immediate suspension pending investigation of ethical violations that would likely result in permanent disbarment. Federal criminal charges for fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering were filed within 2 weeks, as prosecutors recognized the strength of Sarah's evidence and the public interest in holding corrupt attorneys accountable. The prenuptial agreement's enforcement proceeded exactly as Sarah had planned, with David's systematic violations triggering penalty clauses that transferred the majority of his assets to her control. His attempt to hide money in offshore accounts was thwarted by federal seizure orders that recovered funds for restitution to his victims. The comprehensive documentation that Sarah had assembled made legal challenges impossible, forcing David to accept settlement terms that left him financially devastated, while providing Sarah with resources far exceeding what she would have received in a conventional divorce. Rebecca Chen's own legal troubles multiplied rapidly as investigations revealed her pattern of exploiting professional relationships for personal gain across multiple states. Her consulting business was exposed as a sophisticated fraud operation that specialized in targeting wealthy professionals, leading to criminal charges and civil lawsuits from previous victims. The network of corruption that she and David had built collapsed completely as vendors and accomplices sought plea agreements to minimize their own liability. The Mitchell family's response to David's exposure demonstrated the depth of their commitment to integrity over loyalty. Robert Mitchell issued a public statement condemning his son's actions and pledging full cooperation with all investigations. The family law firm implemented comprehensive reforms to prevent future misconduct, while voluntarily compensating clients who had been affected by David's violations. Margaret Mitchell's social and charitable activities were redirected toward supporting victims of professional misconduct, transforming her pain into constructive action. 6 months after the foundation gala that had destroyed David's life, Sarah Mitchell stood in her new law office overlooking Hartford's skyline, surrounded by associates and support staff, who specialized in representing victims of professional fraud and financial manipulation. Her consulting practice had evolved into a full-service litigation firm that attracted clients throughout New England who needed sophisticated representation against corrupt attorneys and business professionals. The financial resources she had recovered through the prenuptial agreement's enforcement had provided capital for expanding her practice while establishing a foundation that supported legal aid services for families affected by professional misconduct. Her expertise in forensic investigation and fraud analysis made her one of the most sought-after attorneys in Connecticut for complex financial litigation. While her victory over David had established a reputation for thoroughness and tenacity that intimidated potential adversaries, Sarah's personal transformation was even more remarkable than her professional success. The confident, accomplished woman who had emerged from David's betrayal bore little resemblance to the supportive wife who had subordinated her ambitions to her husband's career. Her experience with systematic deception had taught her to trust evidence over emotions, while maintaining compassion for innocent victims of others' greed and cruelty. The legal community's response to David's downfall had created lasting changes in professional oversight and accountability mechanisms. His case became a model for how systematic fraud could be detected and prosecuted, while Sarah's investigation techniques were studied by law enforcement agencies and professional organizations seeking to prevent similar misconduct. The irony that David's own legal expertise had enabled his exposure became a cautionary tale taught in legal ethics courses and professional responsibility seminars. David himself had disappeared from Connecticut entirely, his legal career permanently destroyed, and his social connections severed by the comprehensive nature of his betrayal. Reports suggested that he was working in menial positions, under assumed names. His advanced education and professional training rendered worthless by the criminal convictions and professional sanctions that followed Sarah's revelation. The man who had once commanded respect and admiration from Connecticut's legal elite had become a cautionary example of how arrogance and betrayal inevitably led to destruction. The prenuptial agreement that David had crafted with such confidence remained framed in Sarah's office as a reminder that justice often arrives through the very mechanisms that wrongdoers believe will protect them from consequences. His legal perfectionism had created the weapon that destroyed him, while his systematic planning had provided the evidence necessary for his comprehensive accountability. The irony was perfect and permanent, a testament to the principle that those who exploit trust and betray loyalty will ultimately face the full weight of their own choices. Sarah's victory represented more than personal vindication. It demonstrated that careful preparation, professional competence, and moral clarity could triumph over sophisticated deception and institutional advantages. Her transformation from victim to victor had inspired other professionals who found themselves confronting betrayal and fraud, proving that knowledge and determination could overcome even the most calculated attempts at exploitation and manipulation. The Foundation Gala that had witnessed David's destruction became an annual celebration of professional integrity and accountability, with Sarah serving as the keynote speaker, who reminded attendees that the legal profession's reputation depended on holding corrupt practitioners accountable, regardless of their connections or supposed expertise. The evening that was meant to be David's triumph had instead become Sarah's declaration of independence and the beginning of a career dedicated to ensuring that others would not suffer the betrayal she had endured. As Sarah reviewed the final settlement documents that formally concluded her divorce from David Mitchell, she reflected on the journey from discovery to vindication that had transformed every aspect of her life. The prenuptial agreement that was supposed to be ironclad had indeed proven unbreakable, but not in the way David had intended. His own legal brilliance had forged the chains that bound him to consequences he could never escape, while setting Sarah free to build a future worthy of her intelligence, integrity, and determination. The story of David Mitchell's downfall became legendary in Connecticut's legal community, a reminder that betrayal and fraud would ultimately be exposed and punished, regardless of the perpetrator's sophistication or professional standing. Sarah Mitchell's name became synonymous with the principle that justice delayed was not justice denied, when the victim possessed the knowledge, resources, and determination necessary to ensure that accountability would eventually arrive with devastating precision. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.